Good evening. No response. So I always try to start with some light-hearted statements. And many of you must have attended some of my talks. So at the very outset, I would like to mention the point, very important point, that we all want happiness, do not want suffering. That is the starting point. Whatever you are doing, a job or spiritual practice, whatever you are doing, we do it with the wish to have happiness and peace. That happiness and peace also not for just 2 days, 3 days. Long-lasting happiness and peace. That's from where I always start. So we want that long-lasting peace and happiness, right? That you have to acknowledge. Okay, now when you participate in such a talk, don't just be sitting there. Respond to my questions, think about it, try to integrate in your life. Then it will be of benefit. Otherwise, it will become another ritual. So note down these points. And you can actually write down in your home on a paper, I want long-lasting peace and happiness. Because we need to be constantly reminded of the important objectives in life. We are very good in forgetting things in general, and particularly the most important things. We tend to forget so easily. So to make sure that you don't forget these important things, you can write down, I want long-lasting peace and happiness. Because when you attend my talk, or anybody's talk, you should take something with you. These days, many of the like business journals, write-ups, they write a long chapter or article, then in the end they have what they call as takeaways. Because you will not be able to digest the whole thing. So a few important points you remember, you take away. So write that down. You want long-lasting peace and happiness. Now if you want that long-lasting peace and happiness, which you have agreed, I'm sure you agree. Are you with me? Yes. Not very strong. Are you with me?
Yes.
So if you want that long-lasting peace and happiness, which you said yes, which is your birthright, the next key question is, from where are you going to get it? From where do you think you are going to get that long-lasting peace and happiness? From where? Your relatives? Your parents? Money? Status? Do you think you are going to get the long-lasting peace and happiness from these material accumulations, wealth, name and fame? What do you think? What? No, big no. Are you sure?
Yes.
Have you thought about it? Make this point very sure so that we can make a move. If you are just saying, nah, then for the rest of the days, if you just keep on thinking that my long-lasting peace and happiness will come from my friends, my relatives, my brother, my sister, my wealth, my car, my house, then you will be back to square one. So now you said you don't think you are going to get the long-lasting peace and happiness from your relatives, wealth, name and so forth. Also you need to write that down. Now, there is confusion. You want long-lasting peace and happiness. You say you're not going to get it from your friends, relatives, wealth, and so forth. So then what to do? Is there any other way you get that long-lasting peace and happiness? From where else do you think you will get that long-lasting peace and happiness? Is it possible? Number one. It is possible. There's only one who says yes. What do you think? Is it possible to get? I mean, we should. I'm not interested in moving very quickly. I want to say something which you should digest. So the key question is it possible to get that long-lasting happiness and peace?
Yes.
It's not that easy. Think a little more. But, of course, in Buddhism we say it's possible. That long-lasting peace and happiness is Buddhahood. But that's not easy. It's not so easy to digest. But let us say that I am not so sure about the long-lasting peace and happiness, but I am sure that I will get much, much more long-lasting peace and happiness than I have. I can improve, that is for sure. Right? So what are the sources from where you are going to get more reliable peace and happiness? Again, not your parents, not your relatives, not the wealth, not name and fame. You will get that more reliable peace and happiness from where? Not money, not wealth, not name, not fame, not relatives, not friends. From where do you think you'll get it? Within yourself. Within you means, is it already there or? Huh? You have to find it, search, not so sure how to find it. So basically, I think it's not Buddhism, but also all the important religious, traditions, or even otherwise, any thinking individual, they will say that the more reliable peace and happiness has to come from within oneself. How is it possible? Now you have to explain that. Because much of the sufferings, problems, difficulties that we encounter are not so much about external limitations and disturbances, but because of your wrong perception, your wrong ways of seeing things, your wrong ways of observing things, your wrong ways of looking at things. Right? Does this sound? Right? Okay, now listen to this very carefully. There is a Tibetan teacher who said, there is nobody who will catch hold of your hand and throw you into heaven. There is nobody, including Buddha. There's nobody, however powerful, qualified they are, there's nobody who will catch hold of your hand and throw you into heaven. Similarly, there's nobody, however mean and bad they are, there's nobody who will catch hold of your leg and drag you into hell. Nobody. Your worst enemy, whoever they are. We think they are the source of all the problem, but they cannot throw you into hell. At the most, they will kill you. They will not be able to throw you into hell. Your happiness, your suffering is in your hand. Therefore, do not cheat yourself. It's a beautiful verse taught by a Tibetan master. There's nobody who will catch hold of your hand and throw you into heaven, and nobody who will catch hold of your leg and drag you into hell. Your happiness and your suffering is in your hand. Do not cheat yourself. Of course, you will say, I don't cheat myself. You may not intentionally cheat yourself, as you very often do with others. But you cheat yourself because you keep on doing the wrong thing which you should not be doing. Even in terms of food, there are certain types of food which you know is not good for your health, but because it pleases the tongue, you keep on eating it. Don't you do that? That is called cheating. That is called cheating. Therefore, the Buddhist teaching is basically saying, take good care of yourself, for your physical health, for your mental health, and so forth. Right? Because if you educate yourself properly, if you develop that loving kindness, if you develop that compassion, if you develop wisdom and so forth, you will of course be able to take care of yourself efficiently. Like His Holiness Dalai Lama is an wonderful example. Because he studied so hard, got all the necessary qualifications, and more importantly, he has this very strong sense of loving kindness, compassion, bodhicitta, and so forth. So not only he is happy, but he is able to give that peace and happiness to so many hundreds and thousands of people. This is example, living example. Whereas in the ordinary case, forget about helping others. Many of us are unable to take care of ourselves because you are lazy, you are not hardworking, you are not kind, you don't have the wisdom, you don't have the knowledge, things like that, you see. Right? So therefore, of course, we all agreed that we want long-lasting peace and happiness. So if you want that long-lasting happiness and peace, it has to be cultivated. It has to come from its individual causes and conditions. Nothing will come out of nothing. Right? So therefore, the topic that we have chosen today, which you got a copy, there are only 25 verses. But I chose this topic today to give you a jolt, to make a move. It deals with impermanence. Right? So this is the first chapter from Aryadeva's very famous classic text called 400 Verses. One of my favorite texts. I read it several times. When I was in Delhi working there in the evenings and mornings, I even tried to memorize many of these verses and things like that. So I have a lot of admiration. Aryadeva was one of the foremost student follower of Nagarjuna. So this text, as the title says, has 400 verses. 400 verses. And each chapter has, I think, 25 verses, something like that. Right? So this first chapter is on impermanence. Now this is important because the first 4 chapters deals with how to stop the 4 perverted views. We get into trouble because we have these 4 perverted views. We have this tendency to see what is impermanent as permanent. If I ask you right now, are you impermanent or permanent? Of course you will say, I'm impermanent, right? Are you going to live forever or are you going to die? You will say, yes, I'm going to die. But that's not how we live in our daily life. In our daily life, we make this plan for eternity. I'll work hard, I'll finish my study, I'll get married, I'll get a job, I'll buy a house, I'll buy a car. I mean, even an old man, like 60, 70 years old, like me, still planning, I'll do this, I do that. And the planning, if it is just for oneself, it doesn't have much meaning. If the planning is for others, then of course it has meaning. You should keep on working even if you're going to die tomorrow. For others, of course, that's fine. But just for your individual thing, it's just complication of no use at all. So therefore, what these texts are saying is that you do something in your life, that what you do outlasts your life. Something that lives longer than your life. If you value something, if you admire compassion, if you admire helping others, you see, then these values should live longer than your life. If everything finishes when you die, then you really didn't do a good job. You should do something that continues to inspire others for many generations to come, many lives to come, that continues to benefit and help others for countless lives to come. Like, for example, the example of Buddha. He came 2,500 years back. Sorry, very sorry, very sorry. Very sorry, very sorry. Very sorry. Right? Buddha came 2,500 years back. But still his teaching is benefiting millions of people today. There are nearly 500 million people who say that they are Buddhist. And many others who admire and get inspiration from the Buddha's teaching. So we should come up with something that lives longer than your life. Right? But what obstructs us venturing into such a path is misconceptions of reality, the four perverted views. The four perverted views are seeing what is impermanent as permanent, as I was explaining, and then seeing what is unclean as clean. And what is without self as having self. What is empty as having inherent existence. So out of these four, we are today talking about the first chapter, which is called Abandoning Belief in Permanence. Now here, abandoning belief in permanence, we are primarily talking about our own life. Yes, in Buddhist philosophy, we talk about permanent phenomena, impermanent phenomena. So permanent phenomena is like the abstract qualities, like emptiness and so on. But when it comes to our own life, it isn't conditioned phenomena, it is impermanent phenomena. So most of the problems that we bring is in relation to with our five psychophysical aggregates. So therefore what he is teaching here is to see your five psychophysical aggregates as transient, changing, impermanent. The five psychophysical aggregates are your body, your physical form, sound, physical form, feeling, recognition, compositional factors, and consciousness. Five psychophysical aggregates. Now whether it is your body, or it's your feeling, or it's your perception, or it's your recognition, or it's your mind, we tend to see them as permanent, unchanging. And that is a kind of grasping, right? Much of the problem, conflict that we have with other people or environment and so forth is because of too much grasping to oneself, grasping to the physical aggregate and grasping to oneself. As is very beautifully written by a great Tibetan teacher called Kongtang Tembe Dome, where he says, Ne korwe dunge yodocho da dangzin doenji jebe na te tungni jimbe tabzula pu tardo yonjin bebari. Meaning that all the countless problems, difficulties, sufferings that you see in this cycle of existence. So the sufferings that you see is a kind of, infliction brought upon you by the enemy self-grasping. Self-grasping. That self-grasping is like an evil force, evil spirit. So these sufferings are what is being brought upon us by the ghost of evil self-grasping. So, my children, all of you who wishes to get that freedom, that liberation, what you need to do is uproot that self-grasping. Now, when I talk about self-grasping, I'm not saying that you should not have any conception of the self, because the I is there, self is there, very much there. So you call yourself Dharma or Tashi or whatever, you have the feeling I'm Tashi, I'm Dharma, that kind of conventional conception of the self is no problem. The problem is when you see yourself as having absolute, independent, inherent existence. That will become clear if you have disagreement with somebody, if you fight with somebody. As and when you fight with somebody and the negative emotions like anger flare out, then you say, how dare you say this to me? Here, solid, absolutely existing, How dare you say these things to me? To me, who is existing independently from its own side, kind of thinking, you see. And that grasping is so strong that people, even like armies, they even jump into the face of machine gun as if nobody can hurt him, nobody can destroy him. Of course he is destroyed, you see. So we become mad, and we become like, and there is no room for dialogue, room for negotiation, no room for change. I am what I am, nobody can do anything to me, you see. So that is said to be the source of all the problems that you see in the world. We talk about countless negative emotions like anger, jealousy, hatred, so many negative emotions. The source of all these negative emotions is this tight grasping to oneself, seeing oneself as the center of the world, seeing oneself as existing inherently, independently, you see. And because of this conception, you get angry, you develop hatred, you become arrogant, you look down upon others, there is no sense of humility, you see. That is the source of the downfall of that person. Because that conception is called misconception of the reality. So therefore, our target in the long run is to really uproot that self-grasping. But that is not easy. Now here we are kind of talking about emptiness, that kind of a person existing from its own side, that is not there. So the lack of that inherent independent existence of anything is called emptiness. So that is a little bit tough. We'll discuss this later on a little bit. That is a little bit tough. So therefore he says, the tungni jimbe tapsula putandu yon jimbe bachi. Ta yon jang tala che sabe, tuyon tingi rikwe ngaro ni, che rakwe meta dunge ta tung dame togo rimba mangs. So although the aim is to uproot that ignorance, but that is very difficult, that is subtle. Ta yon jang tala che sabe, it is subtle, very subtle, che sabe, extremely profound. So before you know that meaning, there are other little bit easier and grosser things that you should understand. The grosser level of impermanence, grosser levels of suffering. And then gradually emptiness, selflessness. So there are sequences. So therefore, first of all, even understanding very subtle impermanence is not easy. But first understand the grosser level of impermanence. Right? Now, one thing that I want to tell you is don't get scared when I talk about impermanence and death. Don't misunderstand impermanence. Impermanence doesn't mean just death. Impermanence means change. Change is law of nature. And if you are able to see that change, then what you will be able to understand is that all conditioned things arise by depending on causes and conditions. Because there is a possibility to change. Right? Change. So that's what it is saying is, when we talk about all these conditioned phenomena, nothing can happen, number one, nothing can happen without causes and conditions. Whether it's a bad experience or good experience, if you want to experience the good thing, you need to realize that it will come from causes and conditions. Without causes and conditions, nothing will come. So therefore, if you just sit there expecting that good things to come without cultivating the causes and conditions, you will never get it. Similarly, with sufferings also, they come from causes and conditions. If you don't want suffering, then identify the causes and conditions of those suffering and make sure that they're eliminated, they're at least reduced. So things come from causes and conditions. Whether it's your achieving enlightenment, whether it's your developing compassion or loving kindness, it has to come by depending on causes and conditions. So you need to find out the causes and conditions for that. That's number one. Number two, the cause. Number one, we decided it has to arise from its causes and conditions. The cause also must be a favorable cause and condition. Concordant causes, as we say, not inconcordant causes. Right causes, right conditions, not any other cause and condition. Right? For example, this is also impermanent, this is also cause, this is condition. But if I expect this, water bottle producing a baby, it will not be able to do it because it is inconcordant causes. Similarly, if you plant rice seed and expect mango tree, will not come because they are inconcordant causes condition. Number second. Number three, even if it is the right cause and right condition, but just one cause and condition cannot produce things. It is dependent on many causes and conditions. Like when you plant a seed, it needs moisture. If you just put moisture, water and water, no sunshine, nothing, it will get decayed. It will get decayed, right? Right? So you need water, you need warmth, sunshine, and you also need, you also of course need the seed, and you also need the soil. So many things, and also air. So even when you plant a tree, if you're somebody who knows how to plant, then you need to take causes of all this. Some years back in the library, we planted some flowers. But many of us don't know how to plant flowers. So we just brought the soil, It didn't have really much fertility. We just had the soil and then planted that, sapling there, and then put water and things like that. And then we keep on putting water. So one day there was an Australian lady, she came, she was helping us. She brought one bottle, bigger bottle of water, and she opened the lid and put it upside down. Then I said, don't touch it until I come from Delhi. She was visiting Delhi. So she was away for Delhi like 2-3 days, something like that. But the water was intact as it is when she came back. Because there was no room for the water to go down. So similarly, if that soil doesn't get water, doesn't get air, it almost becomes like a mud or a rock, then how can you help that plant grow? Right? So all the necessary causes and conditions must be there. Number 3. So similarly, in the case of achieving Buddhahood also, if you just sit there, practice patience, you will not become a Buddha. Or you will just sit there, meditating on compassion, and you become really, really very compassionate person, which is good, but that will not lead to enlightenment, because you also need wisdom and many other practices, right? So you need, those of us who are aspiring to achieve something, be it Buddhahood or success in other fields in life, you need to make sure that you have the right causes and conditions. Number 1, causes and conditions, then the right causes and conditions, then all the needed causes and conditions. Like when we apply for a job, they say, bring all the necessary papers, bring all the necessary documents, right? If you don't submit it, then you don't get the marks. So almost like that. Then the 4th, even if you have accumulated all the causes and conditions, but if you shuffle the order of the causes and conditions, then again it will not produce fruit, or even if it produces fruit, then it will not be a healthy fruit. Like cooking. Even if you all the ingredients, the different kind of masalas and then the oil and whatever, there is an order. Then you are able to cook a delicious food. But right in the beginning, you put the wrong thing, then the food will not taste, right? 5thly, now even if you have you have the cause, you have the favorable causes, you have all the causes, and the sequence is perfect, but still, if it is not free from obstructions, then the obstructive factors will destroy everything. Like for example, if you are planting a fruit or flower, something, especially in its infantile stage, then suddenly if there is a very strong hail, and during that time if you don't protect it, then this little flower or little plant will be destroyed. And in some places, like I was recently in Dallas, in America, in April I was in Dallas. I saw there the biggest hail I have ever seen in my life. It is, you won't believe, it's much bigger than this lead. It actually destroyed many cars, broke windows. It's like a big stone being thrown upon you. I've never seen one like that in my life. So this kind of hails and other obstructive factors will destroy, you see. So you should make sure that it's also free from obstructive factors. For example, in the case of our spiritual practice, if you are constantly practicing love, compassion, doing meditation and so forth, which is of course good, but then at the same time, you also get angry, if you also develop jealousy, then whatever you are gaining is destroyed by the negative forces. So it's not enough to do the good thing, but also stop the bad thing. Many people, they don't understand this, then they say, oh, I've been practicing for so many years, I'm not making any progress, I don't see any benefit, because they have not stopped doing the bad things. Because stopping the bad things is not easy, because you are addicted. And that's why we talk about meditation. Meditation means getting habituated with the positive ways of thinking. Addiction means addiction with negative emotions. And if you get addicted, it's very, very difficult to remove that addiction. Addiction comes in many forms. It may be addiction in drinking, it may be addiction in coffee, it may be addiction in tea, and I presume that there is addiction in meditation also, unless you be careful. Because when you do meditation also, you need to see the fruit of that meditation. What did you get by doing that meditation? Has that helped you lessen your anger, lessen your other negative emotions? Has it helped you become more, peaceful and calmer? If these things are there, then it's a good sign. If this is not there, then it is another feel-good practice. You feel good there. And that's why there is a story, in Buddhism, that the Sarvakas and the Partika Buddhas, they are also great meditators. And they meditate, and they enjoy that bliss of sitting in peace, And then they completely forget about working for other sentient beings. So they get completely lost into their trance kind of state. And then it is said that the Buddhas have to come and say, your meditation is good, but wake up. Wake up and do things for others. Right? So addiction is very risky, very dangerous. So many different kinds of addictions is possible. So it's not enough just to do good things, but also stop bad things. So that's why one of the most important teaching that the Buddha gave is do not do anything that is bad. Do everything that is good. Completely discipline your mind. This is my teaching. Do not do anything that is bad. He is saying, don't do bad things. Do good things. Both should be done together. And how can you do the good things and stop doing bad things? That's related to your mind. It's not easy. You can't say, from today onwards, I'll become a good man. And many people do say that. They say, since the core of the teaching of the Buddha is to become a good person, so why we have to, rag our brain so much? Why do we have to spend so much in studying and reading this very difficult to understand philosophical books? So that's why Buddha intentionally said, don't do bad things, do good things, and whether you can do good things and stop bad things is very much related to the training of the mind. Therefore, completely train your mind. This is my teaching. And therefore, Shantideva also in his Bodhicharyavatara, he says, in short, after giving a lot of instructions, a lot of advices, then he says, in short, unless you know the secrecy of your mind, even if you aspire to have happiness and wish to shun suffering, you will end up just wandering. You will not achieve anything. Secrecy of the mind. That means the ultimate nature of the mind, the emptiness of nature of the mind, things like that. So your mind, as we discussed right in the beginning, your mind is the key thing in Buddhist practice or even otherwise. So I'll ask you a question. Who is your boss? Who is your boss? Normally people say my father, my mother, and my husband, my wife. They say like that, you see. But no. Your boss is? Your mind. Your boss is your mind. Your mind is your boss. When we talk about taking care of yourself, we are talking about taking care of one's body and one's mind, right? When we talk about long-lasting peace and happiness, we are talking about the physical and mental related long-lasting peace and happiness. Out of these two, you need to confirm this now. Out of these two, which one is more powerful, more important? We are saying mind. But that is the most neglected one. For body we take, and again here we are not good, but we take some care of the body. We feed ourselves all the time, we wash ourselves all the time, we wear nice clothes and also put some ornament. We also do some pulling and pushing exercises, jogging and all this for the body. What did you give to the mind? Honestly speaking, what did you give to the mind? Tell me. Are you giving something to your mind? What are you doing? That's the problem. The most important thing. Your boss is your mind. And the boss is starving. Like your body, if you at least skip the lunch, oh, I'm so hungry, But the mind, what kind of food you're giving? Not much. So much of the problem that we face today in the world is sign of starvation of the mind. Or because the mind is getting the wrong food, the food of anger, food of jealousy, food of hatred. The mind is fed with this. And as a result, you see all the conflicts, turmoils. It all comes from the mind. killing, disliking, segregation, discrimination, come from the mind. So when that Buddhist teacher, when he says your happiness and your peace is in your hand, he is saying take care of yourself, your mind. So when we talk about meditation, when we talk about awareness, when we talk about mindfulness, we are basically saying, if you want to progress, if you want to get more education, if you want to take care of your health, be alert and watchful. Are we watchful? Are we alert? Are we mindful? Be mindful what you are saying, what you are doing, where you are going, and judge whether you are doing the right thing or the wrong thing. The presence of mind must be there all the time. That way you will be able to take care of yourself. That way you will be able to learn. You see? Like we see the same thing again and again, but we actually have not much knowledge about that same thing, be it a plant, be it a person, because we don't have that alertness, the wish to know things. If it is there, then the whole world is an example. The whole world is a teacher. Nature is a teacher. Nature is an open book. Nature is full of instruction. You don't have to just read books. Everything is a learning experience. If you have that wakefulness, Buddha or Buddh in Hindi means somebody who is fully awake. When we call the Buddha somebody who is fully awake, it also has the implication that the rest of us are not awake. We are sleeping. Of course you will say, I'm not sleeping, I'm attending Geshe Lhakdor's talk. Yes, physically awake, but mentally still more or less sleeping. So wake up. The wake up must be there. Alertness must be there. Mindfulness must be there. Just like small children, small kids. They are quite alert. They enjoy almost each and every moment. They cry, they are happy, they are not happy, but very, 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 very open. Even if they got just a toy, small toy, broken toy, that is their world. They will play with it, they are completely into it. But when we grow up, we are not into anything. We are doing something here, a little bit there, and you look like a lost person, not happy with anything, you want more, you don't realize the good things that you have, you're always looking outside, grass is greener on the other side, I should go to America, I should go to Europe, I move to that place. You're never happy anywhere, you see. So therefore it is really, really important to, first of all, to appreciate all the good things that you have. Right? So mindfulness. So out of this many kind of mindfulness, one of the most important mindful practices, mindful of the state of your body, your feeling, your perception, your recognition, your mind and so forth. Right? So therefore, if we read the first verse, I plan to finish 5 verses every day. So we have 10 minutes. So now, in this case, we are fighting against the grasping of permanence. Grasping of permanence, that is our enemy today. Okay? Because in reality, things are conditioned, right? So therefore, impermanent. So therefore, you should understand that, remember that, and see the grasping of conditioned things as permanent as a wrong conception. So what this text is, this chapter is really saying is instigating you to be heedful of this reality of impermanence. Because if you understand this nature of impermanence in general, and particularly the death and so on, it will shake you from within. Otherwise, we'll never make a move. So therefore, the first teaching that the Buddha gave after he got enlightened was impermanence. The first teaching that he gave was on impermanence. Because the first teaching that he gave was on the Four Noble Truths, right? Out of the Four Noble Truths, the first teaching that he taught was truth of suffering. And when he was teaching the truth of suffering, the first feature of the truth of the suffering is impermanence. And one of the last teaching that the Buddha gave was also on impermanence. When he was passing away, then he, called the monks, his followers, and he said, look at the body of the enlightened Buddha. He is also passing away. There's nobody who will not die. He wanted to give that. Why this is important? This is important. Especially if you understand this in its deeper sense. You need to do a little bit thinking. If I quote from the same text somewhere, I don't remember where Aryadeva says, Kharse, Khanlan dirju yumeba, telishigu kalayu. Rangchim la ne shudu deni yungwar chawaka. This is, I think, somewhere from this text. Where Aryadeva says, Khanlan shigu yumeba, a person to whom there is no veneration, no respect to the nirvana, to the liberation. Sorry, it's a person who is not disgusted with this suffering of the samsara. Khanlan dirju yumeba. A person, one who is korban dile kyowa mewa, one who is not fed up with this cycle of existence. That person will never develop respect and veneration to nirvana liberation. And they give the example by saying, Rangchim la nene shundu deni yungwar chawaka. For example, if you are, living in a particular house or home where you think everything is okay, you will not aspire to move to some other house or some other place because you are fine with that house. I'm fine, I'm okay, this place is nice, the environment is nice, so I'm going to stay here. You will not plan to move to America or Europe or things like that. Rangchim la nene shundu, rangchim la kipo yone dehi yona, deni yungwar chawankas. Will not move from that place. So this is our state. Although we say, oh, samsara, just for the sake of saying, we say, oh, this is samsara. But we are basically feeling samsara so far is okay, I'm enjoying. So long as you have that attitude, that feeling, it is impossible to think about moving from samsara, moving towards liberation, enlightenment. That is not possible. Right? Right? So therefore you need to see the limitation of the samsara, cycle of existence, the sufferings, the real sufferings. And once you understand that limitation, then you will hopefully develop some aspiration to come out of that samsara. So it is for that purpose. So the first verse is really instigating you and asking you to be heedful, to make continuous effort in the path to liberation by remembering the death. By remembering the death. So the first verse says, if those whose Lord is death himself, ruler of the three worlds, without a master, sleep soundly like true vanquishers, what could be more improper? So both this Tibetan verse and also English translation is not that easy to understand. But it's basically saying, whoever you are, if you are controlled by that death, that means whoever you are, if you are somebody who is subject to death, the death which is ruler of the three worlds, the death itself has no particular master to make him stop, not to die and things like that. So long as you are under the control of that death, then you will die. Because that death is controller of the three worlds, means in whichever of the three worlds you are born, you are going to die. So that way you are controlled by that death. And without a master, The death itself is no master saying that, okay, you don't make people die, nobody controls it. So this is your state. You are controlled by this horrible death, who is the Lord of the three worlds, who is really the master, who has no other master. If you are controlled by that death, but still, as if you are not controlled by the death, if you sleep soundly, like true vanquisher, means like a Buddha, like somebody who has really seen the truth, like a Buddha, or somebody who has achieved nirvana, liberation, then he says, what could be more improper? Like, for example, if somebody says, Geshe Lhakdor, you will be killed tomorrow. I get this message, 100% you will be killed tomorrow. Then if I say, okay, no problem, I'm ready, I'll not say that. I will be horrified, what to do, where to run away, how to seek support to fight with that enemy. I will not get a wink of sleep tonight, unless you are somebody who is highly realized. Because life is dear to all. It's interesting to notice that people don't want to die. Why, I don't know. I've seen people who are really leading a very, very difficult, miserable life. Hardly anything to it, but still they want to live. That's the way things are, you see. So life is dear to all, nobody wants to die, however difficult the situation is. So therefore, it's but natural that it's but natural that we all want to sleep, want to live, and nobody wants to die. This being the case, and at the same time that you know that there's no escape from the death, still if you don't bother about it and sleep peacefully as if you are already highly enlightened and no death has the capacity to lay their hands on you, then it's very improper. Why? Because you can answer this by saying, yeah, I know death is to come, nothing I can do, so I want to just enjoy my life. That's one way of dealing with it. Many people do that. You say, I know I'm going to die, so why should I worry about it? Why should I think more about it, which brings more anxiety, more problem? So I just try to forget, don't talk about death. That's why many people don't want to hear about death. And now in big cities, their cemeteries are built far away from the outside the city. Why? Because they don't want to see the graveyard. They don't want to be reminded of the death. Whereas in Buddhist countries like Thailand, the monasteries intentionally keep the dead bodies in the campus of the monastery. And dead bodies of different days, like somebody who died 20 days back, somebody who died 1 week before, somebody who died yesterday, and somebody who died long time back, and just what is just left is skeleton, to remind them about that reality. So now, now this is a very important question. Now the key question is it better to think about death or not? Is it better to think or not to think? Like not only death, impermanence, suffering, is it better to think about that or not to think about that? These are crucial questions. Don't just take it for granted because this is said in the Buddhist teaching. You should think the benefit of thinking or not thinking. Is it better or not better? Huh? Not so sure? One way is don't talk about these things, just enjoy, get intoxicated. That's why many people who have the problem, then they resort to drinking. You see, if they had fight in the family, then they start drinking, you see. So that they don't remember things, they forget these things. But that's not the solution. So is it better to think or not to think? Huh? Better not to think? Huh? According to the Buddhist teaching, of course this text is saying think about it. It's a reality. You cannot just close your eye to the reality. Even if you close your eye, death will come. Like for example, if you are flying to America tomorrow, is it better to confirm your ticket or just leave it? Tomorrow is, I'm not so sure. Just enjoy right now. Don't confirm it. Don't even buy the ticket. Don't book the ticket, and just go to the airport. Will you get seat? Huh? Of course, it is better to plan. So similarly, death means going to somewhere else. Death means making a journey. So when you make such a journey, you need some preparation, some planning. Like for example, in our regular schools, in universities, we study. Why do we study? Why do we study? To get a job. What else? To get better prepared for life's journeys. Right? Something like that. So similarly, planning. And in today's world, people talk about 1 year planning, 2 year planning, 5 year planning. In Buddhism, we talk about many lives planning. So we are making many lives planning. So planning means if you realize these inescapable realities and prepare accordingly, then on the day when you die, you will have no fear, number one. And we'll talk about this later on. You will have no fear at all. And number two, you have equipped your mind in such a way that your journey will be very smooth. How is it? I'll give you an example. For example, in the day you can do two things. One, you just go to see His Holiness Dalai Lama, you go to the temple and pray for the well-being of everybody, cultivate a peaceful mind. That's one way you can do in the day. Another way is you be nasty, fight with everybody, take advantage of others, try to exploit others. You do that. The end result is tonight when you go to sleep, the one who had led a nasty, destructive, violent life most probably will experience the same disturbance in the night also. The one who had went to see His Holiness, the temple, and be good, it's almost sure that that person will have more peaceful, happy, relaxed sleep. So this is example how your mind makes a difference. So we are not just ऐसी हवा में बात नहीं कर रहा हम लोग. We are not just talking in the vacuum. So you need to understand this through thinking. So please do some thinking. Otherwise, it will become a ritual. Oh, the Buddhist teaching says this, so I do this. Why you are doing this? I am not so sure, So try to understand this, right? And then also another advantage is that if you realize that I'm impermanent, this person sitting next to me is impermanent, he is going to die, she is going to die, then that makes you develop that feeling of love and compassion to that person. More love and more compassion to that person, you see. If you think, oh, this person is permanent, I am permanent, so we are equally great, we are existing from its own side, nobody can harm me, harm her, then there's not much room for doing good things. And I always give the example, if you have a very elderly lady, 90 years old, lying down in front of us, 90 years old, she's very elderly and also very sick, not able to eat and things like that. Very fragile, very, very thin, very weak. If we see such a lady, elderly lady, not only in terms of age, but also in terms of fragility and sickness, if we see such a person, will you develop a wish to harm that lady? Will we develop a wish to harm that lady? No. Will we develop a wish to exploit that lady? No. most probably we will develop a wish to help that lady a little bit, at least giving her water to drink or some money, whatever. Right? Clear? Why? Why don't you harm that old lady? She's so ugly. She's dirty and sick. You don't like to see dirty things. You don't like to see ugly things. Why don't you harm that lady? It's nothing but natural that when you see that suffering, that vulnerability, naturally the human nature makes you develop that feeling of concern, sense of responsibility, love and compassion, and you will not think about harming or killing that old lady. Because you have seen very clearly with your naked eyes, you have seen very clearly the problem of that lady. So you will not harm that lady. You will instead help that lady, right? Similarly, this is a more vivid example. Similarly, if we go a little bit deeper, a little bit more insightful, and understand the suffering nature of everybody, we are not so different from that old lady. We are subject to sickness, we are subject to death, we are subject to illness, we are subject to all kind of ups and downs. Everybody has one or the other problem. If you take a little bit more time, like it always happens, you for the first time, if you meet your long lost friend, then for the first few, or somebody else, for the first few minutes or something, the initial conversation will be pleasantries, as we call it, pleasantries, saying nice things. How are you? I'm perfectly okay. You are also perfectly okay. Everything is okay. So spend a little bit longer time and speak a little bit more. Then they start sharing the problems, difficulties they have. And I have seen this very clearly. Once I was, accompanying one of the leading Tibetan doctor, Dr. Wangyal, who is no more now. The medical center wanted me to go with him as the translator. That was many, many years back when I was studying in the Institute of Buddhist Dialectics. So we were visiting the 4 Scandinavian countries. So I was helping that physician, that doctor, dispensing the medicine and things like that. So when the patients, when they come for the checkup with the doctor, so in the beginning when they come, they all looked healthy. Everybody's wearing smart dress and nice makeup and the shoes making sound, so like really nice. But when they sit in front of the doctor and the doctor starts diagnosing the pulses and things, asking the question, almost everybody has 3-4 different physical illnesses. So that's life, you see. So once you understand that fragility, that suffering, that problem, the limitation of each and everybody, then whether you know somebody or not, else and when you see, you can fathom that this lady, this young man, this young woman looks all right, but of course I know he's another human being, he has his problems, difficulties. So you will develop more kind of sense of responsibility, more loving kindness and so forth. Right? And that's why His Holiness, the Dalai Lama says, like, the ordinary people like us, we are unable to, the clear indication that ordinary people don't have the real compassion is that when we see somebody who is really poor, destitute, then we develop some kind of concern. We give some money or some food, things like that. But when we see somebody who is in the higher ladder of the, rung of the ladder, like a Hollywood actor, actress, or Bollywood actor, actress, or famous president, prime minister, then there's no sign of compassion to these people. Instead, we'll say, how nice if I'm also one of those. And you will even try to get his signature. Oh, I got the signature of Michael Jackson. Oh, so happy. You see? But in reality, these celebrities, these people who are in the rung of the higher ladder, higher rung of the ladder, Many of them have more problems than ordinary people. They look nice, they have material facilities, but they are very good in pretending that everything is okay. So that's the problem, right? So therefore he is saying, if those whose Lord is death himself, in other words, when your Lord is death himself, who is so powerful that who is the ruler of all the three worlds, and he himself can do whatever he wants because he didn't have a master. So when you are completely controlled by that Lord of death, but still as if nothing has happened, if you sleep soundly like a Buddha, then it is improper. Right? That is it. I think I should not overstay. 1 or 2 questions? Burning questions? Otherwise I'll stop. Yeah, any 1 or 2 questions? You Chignis. Maybe. Ready to run? We should stop before you are completely tired. Otherwise you will not come tomorrow. Oh, Duksnarona. So please think a little bit about what I already said, and then come up with some questions. Okay? Thank you.